Welcome, everybody. This is the first of the NM Sport podcast, and we're going to spend some time talking with the people who will become our hosts during this interesting adventure. I think most of you can pretty much figure out right away that none of us are media people. So we're going to be limping through this process, and we hope you'll be patient with us. But on this first session, really what we want to do is give people a chance to talk a little bit about their work and introduce themselves and their relationship between both sport and the neurosequential model. And those of you who are new to this, you'll learn a lot about what we mean by NM and the neurosequential model. And so don't worry about it right now. But basically, it's an approach that we use in mental health, education, parenting, that incorporates information about how the brain organizes and how the brain changes. And we found it to be really helpful when you're trying to work with children who've struggled. It's helpful in corporate environments when you're trying to understand how to be a better leader, better supervisor. It's helpful in sport when you're trying to help people understand some of the puzzling things that you run into as a coach. And we're going to talk about all kinds of things, particularly focusing on sport, youth development, and healing. So let me introduce initially Megan Bartlett. Megan is a friend, colleague, who is really the true expert in this field. And I'm going to turn it over to Megan to tell us a little bit about yourself and let all of our listeners get to know you.
That's scary. Hello, listeners. I'm Megan Bartlett. I have been working in the sport for good space for about 15 years, which means that I've been able to work with a lot of programs, doing a lot of really incredible intentional work, using sport as an intervention to help support young people, particularly young people who don't otherwise have a lot of opportunities for positive youth development activities. And the sort of great honor of my work is getting to share some of what they do on the ground with other folks, and help people connect across the kind of communities and work that they're trying to do. So the opportunity to connect with the Neurosequential Network means that not only can these folks working in sport learn from each other, but they also learn from great people who are doing work in education and all the other places that Bruce mentioned before.
So, Megan, you are a founder of We Coach, which is an organization that's been very active in this space.
Yes, and is about to change its name. It will shortly be known as the Center for Healing and Justice Through Sport.
Awesome. And you live in Boston.
I do.
A great sports town.
Indeed.
And I'm sure we'll hear all about it during this.
A great sports town, not always great humans behind the great sports, which is part of what I also think we'll talk a little bit about.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the most important things that we all have talked about, is that sport is this incredible opportunity to influence in a positive way someone, really can make a very meaningful impact on somebody's life. But it can also be a soul-crushing experience to be involved in sport when you're marginalized, exploited, demeaned, shamed, which happens all too much in sport. And we're going to talk about that. So thank you. Let me introduce another one of my good friends and an incredible athlete in her own right, Kate Thomas from Australia. Kate, welcome.
Thank you, Bruce. Great to be here.
Tell us a little bit about, Kate, I've known for many, many years. Met her many years ago in Australia when I was visiting. And I was immediately impressed by the fact that she was a world-class athlete. and because I like sports, I like athletes. So tell us a little bit about your sports journey and what you're doing right now.
No problem, Bruce. So, yeah, very lucky to meet you all those years ago. You definitely put me on a new path and really, blew my mind and understanding about NM and all things brain. But prior to meeting you, I was an athlete. I came up through the junior pathways within Victoria and Australia. Started obviously just playing the game for fun and then got a little bit more serious as I got a little bit better at it. Actually, I started playing the game and I think, it was such a healing environment for me because it was after we'd moved back from Papua New Guinea for living for a couple of years and my parents had just separated and we moved back to Kurumburra and I got involved in sport and I had an amazing first coach, female coach. And it was that community that really kind of helped me get through that time and my family as well. But yeah, progressed through into some more serious sport and professional development pathways and ended up at the Australian Institute of Sport for 3 years on scholarship. And that was both an amazing experience and probably one of the most challenging experiences as well for me. But I did get to do a lot of traveling.
Just to interrupt, Kate, can you tell people what that is? Because they don't really have stuff like that in the U.S. I mean, that they do in Australia.
Yeah, no problem. So it's a centre of excellence, really. And when I was there, the model has changed a little bit. But when I went through within the basketball program specifically, athletes were aged from 15 to 19. So it's kind of this developmental program for, athletes to go through that have been identified as being some of the best talent in the country. It has changed a little bit. The age is a little bit older now, which is a good thing, I think. Kids are staying at home a little bit longer, but you actually go there and you live. And the system's set up so that you live in this environment where you have access to all the best training facilities, physio, recovery centre, weights room, all that type of stuff. So it's easy to kind of, to spend as many hours as possible playing the sport that you're there for. You go to school as well. So you're kind of juggling, study and education at the same time, as well as being an athlete.
And so it'll be interesting. We'll go into that whole experience in greater depth at some point, but the U.S. does have something kind of like that. These they'll take kids that have lots of promise, but they're not government sponsored. They're like Nike sponsored, or they're some other sports organization will cherry pick a kid and have him move sometimes quite a ways to go to, quote, school with a handful of other people, and they'll play in these elite leagues and so forth. And there's a lot of pros and cons to that kind of thing.
Yeah,
but it's a quite a rarefied environment.
Yeah, and there's a lot of pros and cons to it here as well, obviously. Which I'm sure we'll get into as we move through. Obviously, young athletes going to an environment like that where they don't have parental support and people around them that are kind of, looking out for them. There's a lot of kind of different ways that experience can go for people. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about what you're doing now.
Yeah, so I kind of work across a number of different areas, but I guess, going back to meeting you, Bruce, all those years ago, I was working with Berry Street and you really introduced me and opened my world to this whole area of NM and trauma. And from there, obviously, I had a lot of opportunities to engage in the neurosequential model. And I got to meet Steve, which was an absolute highlight, very early on in the piece when you were first thinking about the education model. And I was involved in that for a little while before going off and having babies. So I've worked on a number of different projects with kind of this stuff in mind, as well as in a couple of schools within Gippsland. And it's probably, when I heard you were, delving into the world of sport, I kind of really jumped back on the bandwagon and was really, really excited about the idea of what this could mean for sport within Australia and coaches within Australia. Yeah, so since then, I've had the pleasure of meeting Megan, doing a bit of work with the Center for Healing and Justice through Sport, with the idea of launching that brand and amazing, knowledge base within the Australian market as well, and Asia Pacific. We get there. That's really my focus at the moment. Really focusing on, all of those types of things.
Nice. Awesome.
Yeah.
And I just want, Megan, I want you to know that I actually, without even looking it up, I remembered the real name of the center when I was trying to prepare for this presentation. So I'll get it. People will get it.
It's going to take everybody some time.
Yeah, but it once you sort of understand that it's a statement, it's not really, it's an important statement, and makes it a lot easier to remember. All right, Steve.
By the way, I love that name, and I want to know where it came from. Can I ask a question if I'm not the boss?
No, you're the boss.
We all
you're
know
the boss of yourself.
Steve, is the question where did the name come from?
Yeah, how was that name developed? I just absolutely love that name.
Thank you. It started. Our process started thinking about transitioning from a small business to a nonprofit, and then we were speaking with some folks. We're lucky to have the support of Nike's social and community impact team and a lot of the work that we do. And we were speaking to some folks about branding with them. They know some things about branding, a few more things than we do about branding. And basically the consensus was, if you can't have a name that's like Nike, then have a name that tells people exactly what you do. And so I think we started to expand our vision beyond just sharing information around the power of sport to heal and the power of sport to build bridges and overcome divides and level playing fields, and hope that the name now does a better job of representing the totality of what our team does.
Yeah, I love that. That's so good. That's my experience as a coach too. Healing and justice is a big part of the mission, and I think all of us probably have gotten to experience that in some way, shape, or form. But that's why I fell in love with that name the first time I heard it. And I'm waiting.
So, just for those of you who are listening, this is Steve Graner, another one of our co-hosts. Steve, why don't you go ahead and do a more formal introduction? Tell people your experience with sport and what you're doing now.
Well, I'm probably the least accomplished athlete on this screen, but I think I can play more sport. I think I can play more sports than anybody at some point. If you, I maybe could pick up a stick, a bat, a pair of skates, or a basketball, and maybe get by. So I loved being an athlete, and I got to be an athlete with Bruce in track and football. That was a wonderful experience. Junior high back in the day, middle school and high school. I think my favorite sports memories really more come from coaching than playing. And so I coached a little bit of everything, but track and cross country mostly, a little bit of basketball, a little bit of football to put food on the table at grad school. And I coached for 34 years. And I have so many relationships from coaching that when that whole idea of NM sport came about, I was all in, at least in a supportive role. And that's what I feel like I am, just a good support role. My official work with the neurosequential model is more in the education realm, and that's a story all of its own, but again, inspired by the neurosequential model and meeting Bruce and Janna and Kate back in the day. Kate was one of my first two contacts I ever made for NME, the neurosequential model in education. We have never forgotten that relationship, and I think we smile every time we see each other because of that. But really, it was Bruce and Janna's vision ahead of mine. But I think with my good friend Crystal, we crystallized that vision a little bit and made it happen. And so now that's become a pretty big network of like-minded individuals who are really trying to do the best for education for all kids, especially those affected by early childhood adversity. And so that's kind of where I land as the project director for the neurosequential model in education, but very much connected to this mission of sport.
Thank you, Steve. And we'll have an opportunity to kind of go into a little bit more detail about some of the fun stories that each one of you have. I also want to have Janna Rosenfeld introduce herself. She is essentially the power behind this, the scenes. She makes sure that everything gets done. Janna probably won't end up being a co-host, but you will see her and hear her on lots of occasions. And the fact that you're able to click on a link and actually have something come up, that's because Janna has done something. Janna makes everything work. So Janna, a little bit about yourself, a little bit about what you're doing now, and of course, anything sport related that you care to share.
Thank you so much. So let's see. I was just doing the math. I've been working with you, Bruce, for almost 25 years. We're coming up on 25 crazy years of work together. I originally started by coming in on a research project that Makonda O'Connor was doing with you. With adjudicated youth. These are boys that when I reflect back on what this is all about, this podcast, those kids needed sports. These boys in this, Burnett Balin home desperately needed some structure and some care in an outlet that would make them feel good about themselves. But instead they sent me to do group therapy, which was fine. It was a little misfitted a little bit. I think I was 27 at the time and a young therapist. Anyhow, then through those years, we sort of slowly evolved, growing the interest in the model, which was not nearly as organized as it is now, and it wasn't even named as such. And it really is astounding to see the growth that we have now. And And the truth is, it's easier now than it ever has been to coordinate and organize something like this. When we first launched our first website, Bruce, it was coding. I was doing coding. It was crazy. We didn't have color on our website. So I'm just really thrilled. And I've met, just like you guys, just an incredible group of people who are passionate about the same kinds of things. And it's an honor to work with and meet everyone and you all. And I'm looking forward to seeing how this goes. I think it's going to go really well. Also, just to throw out some sports, I can still ride a unicycle, which reflects on my amazing balance ability. I think it was a desire to be truly the class clown. Like I was really embracing it hard in sixth grade. And I really believe that I was shy. I was really shy, but I was a tomboy and very athletic and quite fast. But I didn't really have that, a setting or a structure or an adult that was really pushing or showing me here's how to navigate this. Here's how to get on a team. And so, I look at this and I think about what a big difference it would have made in my life at that time. And so this really offers hope. And I too love the name that you've come up with for this. It really moves the needle beyond just, athleticism and, here in Texas, it's all about winning. Maybe it is everywhere else, but it really just moves this well beyond that and transcends it to, health for kids and adults. So I'm excited about that.
Thank you, Janna. And actually, when we first met, you were like running 5 miles a day, and then you got hit by a car, right? Or you a truck backed into you, or something hurt your leg?
A salad delivery truck from La Madeleine.
Wow.
It backed up. It was missing that beep. You know the annoying beep that the trucks make? There's a purpose for that. And that beep was not, I guess they hadn't put that on the trucks yet. And I was crossing the street. And, it's funny, my supervisor got her sunglasses caught in her hair. I don't know if you guys have ever had that. You take your sunglasses off. And I tried to help her, and neither of us saw the truck, and it hit both of us. So that kind of slowed down.
Oh, wow.
But I can still walk.
So we'll also talk about injuries and the impact that can have on the trajectory of your career.
And looking before you cross roads.
Yeah. All right. You know, it's interesting that technology stuff that's such a good point you bring up, Janna, because we were the first not-for-profit that ever worked at Microsoft to use web-based technologies for clinical work. And, you know, we did, you know, there's all of these sort of web-based telemedicine things now. But we were the whole model, we were the first people to ever do that. And to literally have case staffings and have people from all over the world sit in and watch it and use it as a learning model. The technology was so young that you'd see somebody's mouth move, and then about 4 seconds later you'd hear something, and then it was horrible. I mean, it really was not smooth at all. You know, the technologies are not perfect now, but they're way better than they used to be. So. All right.
I think you should tell us a little about your sports background.
I grew up actually, you know, liking sports, and I was pretty good. Kind of sports played a major role in me making a decision to go to Stanford, which I actually went to Stanford not because it was a good academic school, but because the Olympic coach in '68, Peyton Jordan, was recruiting me and was telling me that that he'd get me to the Olympics. And I, was stupid and ambitious about sports, not school, but sports. So I'm like, yeah, I'll do that. So when I first got to Stanford, it was I kind of, over time, I started to realize that people were saying stuff like, it's the Harvard of the West. And I'm like, what? What? I have to study? I'll never forget. I'm on the bus from the airport to Stanford, and there's some other students that got picked up there. And the kid that I sat next to opened up his book, and he started using a highlighter, which I had never seen. I'd never seen a highlighter before. Like who writes in their books? I was like, in my house, books are like really, they're that revered. You don't even dog ear your book to keep your place because books are special. And I was just horrified. I couldn't figure out why he was doing that. Anyway, I had a lot to learn. So, and I ran at Stanford for my freshman year, and then it was just too much to go to school and keep running. I mean, I completely underestimated how much time it took to do collegiate sports. And so that was the end of my career. And then ended up in medicine and studying the brain. And you guys will hear a little bit about that over the course of the podcast. And we'll have some interesting conversations. A lot of the work that it's interesting. Steve and I have talked about this before. When we end up talking with non-clinical groups about what we do to understand how the brain changes and what we recommend for healing and therapeutics, we almost always default to using sport-related analogies, sport-related examples about training, because the concepts around repetition and dosing and spacing, which is really interval training, right? All of those concepts that have emerged from high-quality sports physiology are very relevant for therapeutics and for education, right? I mean, for cognitive changing the cognitive parts of the brain. So there's a real synchrony between what are the physiological mechanisms that are underneath healing from trauma, emotional behavioral changes in the brain, and building or growing strength in other physiological systems that are related to sports performance. And, it's something we'll end up talking about a lot. Let me just take 1 minute and give people some context. Now, that's just a little bit of an introduction to some of the key people that you're going to get to know in this podcast. We anticipate having some rotating leadership when it comes to hosting and leading the conversations in this podcast. There'll be times when Kate will take a lead and have a guest and lead the conversation. There'll be times when Steve does. There'll be times when Megan does. And there'll probably be a few times when I do. So we just wanted you to get to know everybody a little bit. The more you listen, the more you get to know folks. And we're looking forward to being able to explore a lot of these intersecting areas and learning from all of our guests who we will have, and hopefully sharing some of the things that we're learning in our big network. Steve alluded to it. And if you look at the Neurosequential Network, all of the schools and the clinicians and clinical settings and places and programs that we work, we're in like 28 countries. And we have people who are interested in this topic in at least a dozen countries. And I know that Megan's got a similar reach in North America and probably beyond North America with her work. Kate has a lot of reach in, Australia, New Zealand, and, all the rest of, we think, ultimately, the whole Pan-Asiatic area. So we're going to have a lot of really interesting opportunities to explore sport, both the good and the bad sides of sport. And hopefully this will be an interesting and useful 30 minutes that people listen and get some ideas. And there'll be a few of these conversations where we invite people in. We'll try to have live sessions where people can ask questions and we do a little Q&A. There'll be times when we have pre-recorded, really fascinating conversations with leading athletes and coaches. And then maybe a few times we'll have a couple of didactic sessions and to talk a little bit about some of the things that we know, share some of that. But this is going to be an exploratory process for us. And again, we ask that you, there'll be opportunities for you to give us some input and maybe suggest some topics or guests. And we're looking forward to learning from each other. Any comments, Steve, Kate, Megan, Janna? Jump in.
I don't know. That's a pretty,
on
that's
any
a
of
pretty
the logistics
intro.
around this and like how it sounds, or are we testing that, or are we doing that after you're?
We'll probably do that after we stop recording.
Well, I'm excited. I think this is going to be terrific.
Steve?
I'm super excited for some of the guests that we're going to have. To tell you the truth, the people I'm meeting through Megan and Kate in both the Australia and the U.S. sports side of NM, absolutely incredible people, sacrificial people working in really, really hard settings and difficult circumstances who are doing marvelous work. I can't believe that we won't all be really blessed and in every way by those people that we get to interview. So that's one of the things I'm most looking forward to. I'm an incredibly curious person myself, so I really like to ask questions, and I can't wait to meet some of these people to dive deeper. That's my side of it. I'm very curious about some of these folks who are so great. It's just super people.
Yeah, it's an amazing group. We again, for a little context for those of you who are listening, we have a cohort of leaders in this field who are undergoing a more advanced training in the neurosequential model of sport. And it's just a remarkable group of people. And most of them are, collected by Kate and Megan. So Megan, Kate, this is a talk radio here. I've got a soundtrack I can play.
I was going to say it's late. It's very late where you guys are, girls and guys are today. My goodness.
Yeah, it's late. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's not so bad here. I'm really excited too. Similar to Steve, I think, just really excited about the guests that we can get on and learn from and grow with. I think about it in the Australian context and some of the absolutely incredible Indigenous Aboriginal athletes that would just have so much to share in this space. I think it's going to be no shortage of amazing people that we can talk to and learn from.
Awesome.
Yeah, and look, if Jason Sudeikis wants to come by and talk about Ted Lasso, he's invited.
All right.
That's a new season this week, I think.
Hey, we'll reach out. See what he has in mind. All right.
No, I didn't hear tonight. I didn't hear the sports Megan played.
Let's hear a little bit more about Megan's sports career.
I know a little, but I'd like to know more.
Sure. I, like everybody, grew up playing a lot of sports as a combination, I think, of I have a twin brother. So my parents put us in sports because it was an activity we could both do, and they wouldn't have to take us to, sort of separate activities. And I kept playing because it was, I liked it, but it was also a little bit of anything you can do, I can do too. And
Megan. It's so funny because, you all will get to know this, but Steve, Kate, and Megan are the most humble people on the planet. And so for her to make that tiny little admission, that's very funny.
Yeah. And soccer became my sport. I played 4 sports in high school, but soccer was really where I focused, and then played in college, and thought that was the end of my sort of sport career. I went to graduate school a few years later and got to coach as a graduate assistant. But it was basically like coaching myself. It was the same conference. It was everything the same. It was just like extending my playing career by a couple of years. And I loved it. But again, thought that was the end of it, until I ended up working in a sport for a good organization in Boston, soccer, creative writing, and service learning. And coaching kids who had never played before was a new experience. Coaching kids who sort of were getting something different out of sport was definitely a new experience. I was used to people who had had more opportunities and ended up in a sort of a privileged college environment.
That will be one area that we talk about a lot, is the incredible disparity of opportunity between kids that grow up in communities with lots of resources and kids that grow up in communities with no resources. And again, that's a big part of what the mission of your organization has been, to try to reach those kids both directly and by proxy through sports and rec programs and stuff, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think as a general rule, people sort of assume that there are many more opportunities for kids, regardless of what community you're in. And when you really understand how hard it is for kids to access sport and what kinds of barriers a lot of kids face in accessing sport, from sort of financial to cultural to all kinds of different things that keep them from sport, it's really the disparity is really sort of overwhelming in some ways.
Yep. Well, maybe we can shine a little light on that. Try to make a little change. Try to help you in your mission of your center for justice and healing through sport.
That's right.
I got that right, didn't I?
Almost.
Yes, you did.
You got all the words right. Now I just got to get them in order.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Oh, isn't this not in order? What is it? It's
Healing and justice.
It's healing before justice.
That's because I won.
You won? You
Yeah.
won? All right. I got it. I got it.
He's very secretly competitive.
I was going to say, I see a little bit in there now. What happened to this? Oh, humble me. I didn't do it. It's all somebody else.
Yeah.
I think when it's not about Megan, but it's about the bigger picture, that's where the competitiveness comes out.
That's good. I like that. I like that. All right.
Megan's one of the sweetest people I've ever met, but I'll tell you, I don't think I'd want to get on the other side of her shoulder on the soccer pitch. So I got a feeling she might even be a little dirty out there. That's just what I'm thinking.
Bit of white line fever.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if I could. I can barely jog now anymore, so I don't know if I could even play soccer. But all right.
I think what people don't expect from me is that I'm only 5'2", so my shoulder comes up to most people's hips.
Are you really that? I didn't. It's funny. We had lunch. I didn't realize you were that short.
Yeah, I'm not a big person.
Huh. Okay. Well, that's fine. Some of my favorite people are short people.
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you for that. Because I'm right on the level with Megan. Just a little taller.
All right. So I'm going to end it here. I'm going to stop. I'm going to say thanks, everybody. We'll see you again, hopefully, relatively soon. And we've got a lot to learn about this whole podcast thing, but we'll do our best, and we'll try to make this something worth listening to. Be good.
Oh.